This is the continuation of a trip Wayne and I took last summer. We spent 3 months in Europe, either traveling through or staying through 16 countries. We gave one on Eastern Europe, and this is the continuation of Western Europe. I also wrote a blog for us who are old. It's actually like a journal, but now the contemporary term is a blog. And there is the website for the blog. I try to write every day, so there were about 85 or 90 entries along with photography that we took along the way. So at your leisure, this is the website for our travels last summer in Europe. So our journey continues. From the last time we spoke with you, we were on the beaches of Normandy in France. So we'll continue with 3 major stops on this trip. On the left is Holland, in the middle of the UK, and on the right to France. Just a quick note too, Wayne had mentioned about engaging. Also too, if anyone needs to leave at any time, please feel free to do so. You're certainly not a captive audience. We do ask that for your mobile devices, if you could just please silence them during the course of our class today. Okay? So we are in Paris, and in order to get to London, this is our first stop. These are images from Cambridge, the medieval city. We will be visiting Cambridge a little bit later on. But we arrive at England through Paris. We took the train through the Chunnel. The train on the left is Eurostar. That's what we took. And just a word about the day that we traveled. We traveled on Sunday, July the 15th. We were in France during the World Cup soccer tournament that France won last year. And we were so engaged in the tournament. The championship game was Sunday the 15th, and we had traveled to London that day. So I wound up missing the first half, but I caught the second half of the game in a pub in London.
Has to get that sports in.
But
interestingly about the Chunnel is, we've talked to people and they say, they're claustrophobic, they couldn't go. But actually only 32 miles of it is a tunnel, and 20 miles is under the water, so you don't think about that. But last night I was questioning myself, like if we had taken a car, like you don't drive through the tunnel like you drive through the tunnels in New York City or whatever. You actually put your car on a train. But then my thought was, so do you get out of that car? Because then I think I would feel claustrophobic in a car, in a train car, through a tunnel. And they said you can get out, it's an air-conditioned area, and you can get out and stretch, but you really do stay with your car. And one of the good things was it said it was like 47 pounds for a car with as many passengers as you can fit in your car legally. And it includes all your luggage and everything. So some of the comments after I looked that up, I thought were really interesting, that this is such an inexpensive and quick way to go from Paris. Well, actually they leave from Calais, they have to drive to the port, and then they get off at the port on the other end, whereas we got on in Paris. But I thought that was interesting because I didn't know how I'd feel, but when you're in the tunnel, they announce it, they go, we are approaching the tunnel. Everybody just, be prepared. But it's like traveling on a train in the dark. It was really nothing, and the whole trip wasn't that exciting.
So when we left Paris, there were 4 major train stations in Paris. So we left from the station called Gare du Nord. And from there, we take the Chunnel and we wind up at this train station, which is what the main train station really in London is Liverpool Station, those who have been there. This is St. Pancras, Pancras, which is the international destination. And the train on the left is the Eurostar that we took. So from the disembarking from the train, we take the tube or the subway to Canning Town, which is just outside of London. That's where our hotel was. So we get on the tube, and we start out toward the hotel, and of course we have to go through here. So you can see the image of the fictional character on the right. So we stayed in a budget hotel in London called Ibis, IBIS. They're not very big, but they're very comfortable and serves our purpose perfectly. The way we travel, we push ourselves 14 hours per day. So the hotel room for us is just to sleep at night and get a shower in the morning.
But this was a new Ibis, pretty new, maybe a couple of years old, and it was a high rise, and it overlooked a lot of London where they were doing a lot of building out where the Olympic stadiums had been and everything. So
Yeah, as we go through our travels in London, you'll see images from our hotel overlooking the Thames into a revitalized London. So our first stop is Buckingham Palace. This was a townhouse that was built in 1703. That had been a private property for about 150 years prior to that. In 1761, King George III, who was not a friend of America's, we remember, designated the property as Queen Charlotte's house, and it became the permanent residency for the monarchy, beginning with the ascension of Queen Victoria in 1837. The image on the right are the main gates. That's our daughter Lindsay, who was with us on the trip, and Lindsay will make several appearances during the course of our...
Well, I have to say, we had to wait probably 30 minutes to get, it looked like nobody was there. And so I couldn't take it without anybody in it, so I took it with my daughter. And that's the square, like across the street from it.
This is the square across the street from the palace.
Well, across the, yeah.
And the gardens. And one of the things, for those of us who've traveled extensively through Europe, one of the things that we have definitely found represents the image on the right. There are public statues all over many of the cities to commemorate individuals as well as events.
Is that Kensington Gardens that's there?
We will
Probably.
get to Kensington Palace.
No, yeah, actually, yeah,
I'm
where
sorry.
we got off the subway or the metro, we had to, that is a huge park, and we had to walk probably a mile or two to get to Buckingham Palace. I don't remember the name of the gardens, though.
And of course, Waynette had a career in retailing before she wound up in Yosemite. So we have to go here. This is Harrods Department Store. A little history, it was Charles Harrod started a small retail operation on the site, and in 1889 sold it for about 120,000 pounds. It's now owned by the Kingdom of Qatar, has over 5 million square feet of retail space, and actually has its own zip code. So what's it? And over 330 different departments within the store. But of course, this is the image from the outside, and then you have to go inside and see some of the exotic things that are on sale. So when was the last time we bought a pair of shoes with lips on them, right?
I think they were about $600, just one pair.
And when was the last time you walked into Macy's and you had a ceiling like that?
This is on the elevator. It's the elevator down, and you look up, and there it is.
Or the last time you went into Dillard's and you had a caviar bar?
And a place to hang your handbag underneath.
Anyone interested in carrot cake? There it is on the right.
$90.
About $90. It's the price last summer for the carrot cake on the right was 70 pounds. Translated in U.S. currency is about $90, or about $8 a slice.
Yeah, which is kind of comparable to the Cheesecake Factory. That's not bad. I guess we never bought a whole cheesecake at the Cheesecake Factory.
They were about $30.
And then there was a fishmonger there, and there's really an octopus, and lots of fruits and vegetables.
Anyone like octopus for dinner? They'll keep it on ice for you. This is the Tower Bridge, one of the iconic structures in London. It was built between 1886 and 1889, and it, excuse me, it represents one of these strong, iconic images of the city.
And it was actually built to access the business part on the far side there. It was the main thoroughfare for that.
And two more images of crossing the bridge.
We had to walk over it.
Waynette loves bridges, and of course we had to walk over this one as well as almost every other bridge that we crossed in Europe. But when you go across a bridge with historic significance and reverence like this, it's really something special. Now these are images from our hotel. Remember we had talked about being in a high-rise just on the Thames. The image on the left is the U2 Theater. O2 Theater, I'm sorry, where many concerts are held. And those who have seen the recent movie films, Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocket Man, some of the concert footage from those events took place in the arena on the left.
Well, no, that's a fairly new arena, but I don't think that's fairly new. Anyway. And then in the middle is the London Eye. Most of the cities, including Vegas, have put in these major rides. We walked under it, but we didn't go on it.
Is that like the one in Las Vegas?
Yeah. I mean, they're all. This supposedly is the biggest one. I've been in the one in Hong Kong. We did ride it. We had to be a tourist. Yes, they're enclosed, and they fit almost maybe 6 to 12 people in the car. There's a lot. There's seats and standees. It's pretty, and it goes very slow. You don't even feel like it's moving. It's on the move.
So then we go over to one of the train stations, and we take a regional train to Windsor Castle. And when you get off the train, we were there last summer, right after the marriage, and when you get off, there's a huge mural of Meghan and Harry smiling and waving at you when you get off the train.
You can take your picture with them, right?
I did not take a picture with the royals, no, I did not. But this is Windsor Castle.
Castle? She's always going to Windsor.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it is very close into London. Yeah, it's not far out. It's a short, well, she doesn't take a train, but it's a short train ride out there. There's so many castles. There's a castle on every corner.
Windsor Castle was built by William the Conqueror in the 11th century.
It's really very large when you get inside. I mean, the chapel where Meghan and Harry got married, we're going to show pictures of that. It's a huge complex. Like, when we pencil in our time, we think, oh, an hour. It's an hour just to get the ticket. And then from there, there's just so much to see. In fact, my daughter and I walked around the walls. We started out thinking, okay, we'll just walk along this little wall, and it went around the entire complex. And
you can see the wall there. When you get off the train, you actually walk through the small town of Windsor, which is right here, that leads up to the castle. And there we should have a pointer here. Anyway, so you start at the barrier on the left, and that creates the line. It can snake all the way around, and the wait to get in the castle can be long. I don't recall if time tickets were allowed. For us, we had to wait in line. It was a good 45 minutes to an hour before we got in.
I think we had tickets, and we went up to the front and said, we have tickets. They said, so does everybody else. Get online. Don't you remember that? I'm like, oh, okay. So why do we have one?
Okay, and that's the iconic view of the castle from a distance. St. George's Chapel, where the wedding took place. Every time we go to these kinds of structures, either the castles or the churches, I always turn away and I said, very medieval. And you could tell by the architecture it really is. Those were the front steps where the procession into the church took place, and the chapel on the right. No photography allowed inside, and everyone is clicking away, right? So the images on the image on the left to me was rather striking. This was actually the chapel where the ceremony took place, and all the flags of medieval England are up on the ceiling, along with the buttress architecture. And another, excuse me, another image on the right from the interior. A walkway through Windsor Castle on the left, and one of the iconic images of England on the right. We also took time to go to the theater. This is Her Majesty's Theater. We saw Phantom of the Opera there. We also saw it on Broadway in New York, and we saw it at the West End in London. It's a great play for those who have seen it and know the score.
It's their 37th year.
And one of the longest running
37 years.
One of the longest running productions. And it continues very strong both in New York and in London. This is the National Gallery. until the early 20th century was known as the Tate Museum, but the collection from the Tate then moved to a separate museum that we will visit in a second. Just a note about the National Gallery here. No, I'm sorry. I have a note on the British Museum that's coming. The National Gallery is the main art museum in London, and it sits on the edge of Trafalgar Square. And we'll get to that in a second. Here's the interior of the museum with the galleries. We love museums, and we try to get to as many as we possibly can. We'll show a couple of museums here on this trip. Some of the visits will be very short, and we'll say, well, this museum, this museum was massive, and how come we only have a couple of shots? Just to give a representative view, and then those who have been duly inspired to go on to the museum will be able to continue their research or visit on their own. And more of the interior galleries. The building is iconic and extremely well appointed. These are some of the paintings, Degas on the left, the Renoir on the right. These are a number of paintings that are representative in the National Gallery. It sits right on Trafalgar Square. You can see it on the left, which is one of the great centers in the world, right? So the image on the left is Trafalgar Square, and which is also a great meeting place, but it's huge and it's massive and has all of these streets that feed into it. So if you tell your friends, let's meet at Trafalgar Square, good luck, you'll never find them.
Yeah, and it used to be called Charing Cross. I'm not sure why it changed its name, if you're familiar with that.
And there are 4 iconic lions that guard 4 entrances to the square. There's one on the right, also one on the left, and as we had mentioned with outdoor sculptures in Europe, the figure on the right is part of the outdoor artwork and sculpture that's part of Trafalgar Square. This is the British Museum. It was founded in 1753. I want to make sure I get this right. Founded in 1753, it has over 13 million objects, and the library itself has over 150 million objects. The latest figures are in 2013, we're close to 7 million visitors walk through the doors. There are 2, of all of the holdings in the British Museum, 2 of the most iconic. Here's the dramatic entrance and stairwell. 2 of the most iconic, this is the Elgin Marbles. For those who know briefly the story of the Elgin Marbles, and we see, yes, Thomas Bruce Lord Elgin stole them from Greece when they fell off of the Acropolis, and he thought he would take them to England for safekeeping. The Elgin Marbles here have been the subject of international dispute for 200 years. Greece wants them back, and England says, no, you're not going to get them back. So we had been to Athens, we had been to the Acropolis, and when we got to London, I told Waynette, I said, if I go anywhere, I must see the Elgin Marbles, because the whole story of that really fascinates me. And the second iconic image is the Rosetta Stone, which was founded in 1799 by a French officer during a campaign in the Middle East. When the British conquered the French, they took the Rosetta Stone to England. It's been there since 1802, and is one of the early objects of the historiography of ancient Egypt. It tells the story. If you can decipher it. The pictures are not very clear for 2 reasons. Number one, it's kept under glass, and photograph is extremely difficult. And the image on the right shows how many people crowd around it. And there's always 3, 4, 5 people deep to crowd around. But it is definitely worth seeing, and one of the great relics left from the ancient world. The Rosetta Stone proved to be key in deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphics, thereby opening a window to ancient Egyptian history.
Yeah. It was kind of hard to read. It's very difficult.
Let alone translate, right?
So it was the hieroglyphics.
Right. And part of the British Museum are terrific Oriental galleries, and these are representative images from the Oriental galleries.
A sculpture like this is also in the Broad Museum in Los Angeles, and I think I've seen it in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It's little pieces of metal that they take off bottles, and the artist weaves them together into it and drapes it. It's pretty fascinating. And when you go into Broad in LA, it's just like right there at the top of the escalator.
Additional images from the Oriental Gallery. And these are images from London. The phone booths are iconic images of London. We were hard pressed to find any phones that were actually left in the phone booth.
Yeah.
But we did manage to capture our daughter inside one of them.
Yeah.
And the image on the right is a monument to first responders.
And that's right outside of that St. Paul's Cathedral. Wow.
When in London, the Globe Theatre was established in 1599 by Shakespeare's company, burned down twice within a 30-year period, and was finally rebuilt on the site as a modern theater in 1997 and opened by the Queen. We did see a presentation there. And it was to me, it was like stepping back into the age of Shakespeare. The architecture of the theater is pretty much the way Shakespeare would have found it when he first erected the theater in 1599.
And it is built to the specs of the original one, so you can imagine how uncomfortable the seats were. But then think of all the people that bought standing room only seats down below.
Yeah, they were probably the smart ones.
Yeah, really, it was probably more comfortable.
This is an image across the Thames, looking into on the side of the Tate Modern, and we'll get to the Tate Modern Museum in just a moment. But this is the looking across the Thames. You can see the bridge on the right. Just like Paris, there are many bridges that cross the river to get from the cultural side, which is where the Tate and the Globe Theatre is, across the river, and you can see the high-rise buildings that represent commercial London. This is St. Paul's Cathedral on the left, and St. Paul's Cathedral looking across the Thames on the right. The image in the middle, and the image on the right is the Millennial Bridge that connects St. Paul's with the cultural destinations on the other side that we had talked about, primarily the Tate and the Globe. There had been a religious structure on the site of St. Paul for 1,400 years. The great Renaissance architect Sir Christopher Wren designed the building, and in the very top of the dome is called the Golden Gallery, 530 steps to the top with a tremendous panoramic view of London. Our daughter walked up there, we did not.
I took the illegal pictures that you weren't supposed to be taking.
But again,
church.
there's no photography in the interior, but St. Paul's remains one of the iconic religious structures, especially based on the architectural designs of Sir Christopher Wren. The image, there's the top of the Golden Gallery in the middle, and because of the light coming through, it's difficult to see people standing there. But you can see from the images on the left how high it is, and the interior of the church on the right. But definitely St. Paul's should definitely be on the bucket list for those visiting London. This is the Tate Modern. We talked about the Tate Museum being part of the National Gallery. A new museum was created in the old Bankside power station. The image on the right was a power station that was built between 1947 and 1951 and ceased operations in 1981. And from there, the modern art moved from the National Gallery, which was renamed to the Power Building, now named the Tate Modern. It's one of the largest built art museums in the world for contemporary art. And some of the galleries, Andy Warhol in the upper right represents part of the galleries, and these are other galleries. Sack of Potatoes in the lower right. We were still trying to figure out the imagery for that.
But it did say that a lot of people that go to that museum want to see that power plant that has been turned into an art museum. It was quite controversial what to do with the building, and I guess the art museum won out.
That's also a similar concept of the Orsay Museum in Paris. And we'll visit the Orsay a little bit later on in our trip here. But the Orsay also was in a converted, almost an industrial building. It was a train station. And we'll talk about that when we get to the Orsay. But the Orsay and the Tate evolved through similar commercial enterprises into cultural institutions. Kensington Palace is essentially the residence of the younger royals. Kate, William, and their kids live there. Meghan said, I don't want to live there. So Meghan and Harry are not there. They're probably somewhere else in London. But Kensington Palace did have a number of art galleries as well. We saw a great exhibit on the fashions of Princess Diana at that time. And Kensington Palace is essentially the residence for the younger royals, as they say. Chinatown in London. Every major city has a Chinatown. We did go to dinner a couple of times there, but found the food to be exactly as you would find in Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. It was not authentic. We spent some time in China, and the cuisine there was totally different.
Well, we couldn't find anything to order in
than
China.
the Americanized version, but nonetheless, we do have an affinity for Oriental, so we did gravitate toward the Chinatown of London. And you can see the welcoming arch on the image on the right. One in London, the Tower of London. It dates over 1,000 years. William the Conqueror also had his fingerprints on this as well. One of the romantic images of the Tower of London is the dungeon. And I remember as kids, my parents would say, if you're not good, we're going to send you to the Tower of London. So that was supposed to be a great warning sign. But there's something here about how Anne Boleyn, right? How the tower started, and the legend has it in 1483, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, sent his nephew's 12-year-old Prince William V and his 9-year-old brother into captivity, and neither were ever seen again, and Richard assumed the throne. So that was one way to get rid of your adversaries, even though they were kids. But the main holding in the Tower of London, and here's the exterior, is this. So if you want to visit the Crown Jewels, get there by 9 o'clock. Otherwise, the line is enormously long, and you will be frustrated by waiting hours to see it.
And it was totally revised in, what was it, 2015? And interestingly enough, they actually have a conveyor belt on the bottom rung so that people keep moving. But if you really want to take a lot of time and not be very close, you can go to the one behind it and try to push through the crowds, because you don't have a lot of time to see all of the details. But yeah, you want to stop that conveyor belt. Otherwise, you'd never get through. Yeah.
Also, we found crown jewels in other countries as well. In the Parliament building in Budapest, for example, there's a very impressive display of the crown jewels of Hungary with the military guarding right in front of the glass, and your time is limited there as well. So we've been fortunate to see some of the crown jewels in a number of locations in Europe. Other images from the grounds of the tower.
And of course, there are gift shops there, and we actually ate lunch there. Mark says it's the best fish he had all over Europe.
Good fish and chips in there.
It was a really nice cafeteria. I mean, you go in there, you think, okay, I'm going to see the crown jewels, and then it's just so much. In fact, there is a memorial. We didn't put the picture up to Anne Boleyn and those who got killed. and it's a glass pillow, and they said something, and then a round thing with the names of the people, and it said the pillow was to soften, I guess, the blow of the death. We didn't put it in here. We were talking about it last night. And these are the living quarters for some of the people that actually stay there. And they all have guards there, too. They have the guards. Oh, there it is. Right on the bottom left is that memorial to the people, right at the bottom left. It's glass. You can't really see it all that well. And then from inside the Tower of London, you can see Tower Bridge. So I thought that was a really cool picture to take, yeah. And then you can walk along the walls, and we kind of lost Mark for a while. So my daughter and I walked the entire, and every place is a great shot. You know, it could be modern London on the left-hand side and the Tower Bridge on the right.
Throughout the trip, I constantly told Wayne, I said, you cannot take a bad picture in Europe.
And then we thought this was cool because you've got, and that big skyscraper being built right in the background. Okay, Westminster Abbey, we did not get in the church. It's not open all that long each day. But basically now it's used for mostly ceremonial things, weddings and whatever.
Yeah, Westminster Abbey is essentially for ceremony. It was part of the, oh wait a minute, there's a note here about that. It was part of the Benedictine chapel until the monastery was dissolved in 1533.
So many people are buried there. Every step you take, you're on somebody.
Yeah, it's essentially used for burials and coronations. So Westminster Abbey and the Houses of Parliament. Here are the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben, with the clock tower. The House of Commons and the House of Lords meets here. We did not go in, although it's very similar to the U.S. Congress, where you can actually go in as a visitor. And these, again, are representative of commercial growth in London.
Well, this was from our hotel, and this is where you can see them just building these massive, it kind of looks like the Hong Kong harbor, right? Just such massive amount of humanity, I guess, wanting to live in London. And they're doing landfill there, and see to the right, you can see that O2 venue.
So is that housing or?
Yeah, I believe it's going to be
Commercial.
housing. I think it's going to be housing.
During our trip to London, I took a side trip to Cambridge, researching for a book that I'm writing, and I had to go to the archives at Churchill College. This is the building along with the sign. Cambridge University dates to the early 13th century. Was founded in 1207, and that's part of the campus on the left. And just there's a small river or water stream that goes through the town that separates a part of the college campus to the rest of the town, and there are some of the buildings that represent medieval Cambridge. I did not go to Oxford, just went to Cambridge because that was the day that Lindsay and Wayne took off to go to other parts of London, and we'll visit with them in just a moment. But Cambridge was very impressive, especially with the buildings left from the 11th and the 12th centuries. So this is before. We know these guys? Before and now.
Abbey Road. So this was my daughter's wish on this trip, was to go to Abbey Road. And interestingly enough, it's the only thing she GPS'd and found, because I thought, I don't know where it is, I'm not looking for it, I'm not interested. And she said, I have it right here on my GPS, I know exactly how to get there. And we weren't the only ones there. There's always a crowd, and I feel sorry for, I mean, the neighborhood is a very lovely single-family homes and some apartment buildings you can see in the back. And these poor cars have to stop every one gets through it. And I think she'd walked back and forth at least 15 or 20 times, but there was a man there that was there the whole time we were there, and he was like he was walking back and forth with the crowds the whole time. And that sign is not right there at Abbey Road, it's on another building further down. They said there's no sign Because I said to her, how do we know we're here? She said, I don't. This is it, you know. They steal the sign like daily, so that one is way up on a building further down the road. And then this is really the studio on the right, and then they have, of course, a store, Abbey Road Studios store, where you can go in and buy some trinkets and stuff. And this is just a picture of a church that was just down the street, and I thought it was beautiful, but I also took it because, you know, you think, oh, this must have been a huge recording studio that the Beatles worked out of, and it was just in a very little neighborhood. And one of them lived nearby. Was it Paul? One of them lived in an apartment nearby, and I guess they found this studio. So that's Abbey Road. Then
we leave London, and we're going to go on to Paris and visit in Paris a little bit. Some of the iconic structures. It's interesting, the one on the right, the Arc de Triomphe, I actually took that on Bastille Day. There are 11 different roads that feed right into the Arc de Triomphe, and traffic is totally shut down on Bastille Day. So I thoroughly took advantage of having no cars and no people, and took a shot like that. I'm always accused of waiting to take the picture, make sure nobody else is in the picture. You want to have it as clean and pristine as possible. But, so I tried to do that, and I really lucked out on the day, on Bastille Day in Paris. We're going to visit Bastille Day in just a moment. The building on the left is called the Conciergerie. It was first a royal palace. Then it became a prison, and many, during the French Revolution, were taken from there and found the guillotine elsewhere in Paris. And now it is an administrative building for the courts of France and also of Paris.
And across the street, like this way, is a La Chapelle church that we never did get in. We planned it every day, and somehow we just didn't get in. It has supposedly the most beautiful stained glass windows, and it was part of that whole royal palace complex. And we got close. I think it wasn't open after we had walked over this bridge, but this building has always fascinated me, and we really didn't know exactly what it was for until last night.
What makes this building, to me as well, very attractive are the turrets on the top of the building. That represents architecture from the Middle Ages. So we were able to capture Notre Dame before the fire. Here's the spire that
Collapsed.
And that's the image of Notre Dame in the front of the building on the right, and the image on the left is in the back. And you can see the spire behind the dome on the image on the right.
And also on the left, you can see the spire.
Yeah, and the image on the left, on the right side of the structure. Notre Dame dates to the 12th century. The first foundations were put in 1163. The stained glass is absolutely magnificent, or was. Hopefully it will be restored.
I think it's saved.
Yeah.
I think part of the stained glass was saved, and the image on the right shows the traditional and quintessential architecture of the period. The image on the left is the courtyard behind the building. That's Pope John II. And again, another representative of public art throughout Europe. And the image on the right is the spire again, but Notre Dame actually sits on an island in the middle of the Seine that is accessible by walking bridges. This is the Pantheon, designed after the one in Rome, which is essentially burial places for the French monarchy and important people in French history. The architecture is very Romanesque, and represents the kinds of architecture that were in the Pantheon, for those have seen the Pantheon in Rome, for example. Luxembourg Gardens, one of the two major gardens in Paris, the Tuileries Gardens, right down on the Champs-Élysées. Great public garden. Unfortunately, we do not do justice because there are only a couple of images here to move on, but
We did happen to be there on a Sunday, so it was, I'm sure it's always busy, but it was quite nice to see people. The next picture shows the boating, right, Mark? Oh, you took it
No.
out.
We
They do the little motorized boats in that lake, and the kids are all excited about it.
Yeah.
Very lovely. You can see on the right.
We were also in Paris on Bastille Day, which is much different the way the French celebrate their independence than the Americans. It's extremely solemn in Paris. It's really not festive the way we know it in the United States with Uncle Sam working the crowds and hot dogs and baseball games. The image on the left is a flyover.
July 14th. Yeah, July 14th.
It's July the 14th every year. Image on the left is a flyover. We had talked about streets being cordoned off. There's the Arc de Triomphe again. And the crowds lining the streets for tanks and a military presence on Bastille Day. Eiffel Tower is lit up, and that's the crowds that gather around the Eiffel Tower for fireworks on the night of Bastille. And these are images of France. These are one of the many bridges that transcend over the Seine. And we talked about public art. This is a statue of Charles de Gaulle, who helped rescue France during World War II. Extremely hot the day we went to Versailles. I actually went into the building and toured the grounds. Lindsay and Wayne actually went to the gardens. Versailles dates back to 1682 and was the home of French monarchy until the revolution in 1789. The two most important elements of Versailles are the royal apartments and the hall of mirrors. This really does not do justice to Versailles, but especially the image in the middle. The chandeliers, the hall of mirrors, the gold everywhere, the salon on the right and on the left. Just a magnificent building. And the gardens as well, and the public statues. Legend has it all the way at the end here, Marie Antoinette didn't like the building, so she built her own little remote cottage at the end of the gardens. But we all know what happened to her in 1789. She said, "Let him eat cake," and they said, "I don't think so." Right. This is the Chateau at Vincennes, which is one of the least known structures in Paris, and not too many people actually visit it. But it is a very impressive structure that dates back to the 14th century. I know the writing is kind of small. King Charles V, who lived from 1364 to who ruled 1364 to 1680. The image on the right, the tower, is called a keep, K-E-E-P. It was essentially the administrative center of the particular realm at that point. If you travel through, especially in France, where there's so many castles, many do have a keep, and the keep was the administrative center of that particular structure. So these are additional images of Vincennes.
So this was actually open that day. It was just a little flower shop, and then we just took a picture of one of the apartment or condo buildings there with the mansard roof and beautiful elegance. It was just a really lovely section. We were very surprised. And then we found the butcher shop, and that was open that day, and you can see the cobblestone streets. It was very, very nice.
This is Sacré-Cœur. It's a Roman Catholic facility built in 1888 and sits in the Montmartre section of Paris. The steps are usually, bless you, the steps are usually a very good meeting place for people.
A lot of young kids hang out there at night.
And Montmartre was a bohemian section of Paris in the late 19th century that attracted painters like Van Gogh.
A beautiful view of Paris from the top.
So no trip to Paris is complete without going to the Louvre. That's the good news. The bad news is we only have one image. And here are the two of the most famous residents of the building. We recognize them. The Louvre started as a royal palace and became an art museum in 1793. It has 5 floors and 3 interlocking wings. And for those who've been there, I would describe the Louvre in just one word: massive. The galleries are just enormous, and the holdings in the museum date from the 7th century BC up until the mid 19th century. The glass structure in the middle was designed by Chinese-American architect I.M. Pei. That opened in the late 20th century. It was controversial from the start. It's really an interesting discussion on whether that glass entrance should have been built and what it represents. And for those that have piqued their interest, I would suggest that you can research a little bit further. There were essential arguments why the glass structure should not have been built, especially not by a resident of France.
And then we were reading last night that in 2014 they decided it still isn't big enough to handle the crowds coming in, and they were redoing and restructuring that whole entrance even more.
The day I went to the Louvre, I entered through the subway. There's an entrance right from the subway you can enter, and that's how I went, and I exited through the glass entrance into the plaza. We also took a side trip. We took a regional train line out to Giverny, the house of the Impressionist painter Claude Monet. That is his house and part of his garden. The grounds, they were in the summer, the grounds were just absolutely magnificent. First, here's the interior of his house, his kitchen, and that's a studio. What's interesting about a studio on the right, all of the paintings there are all reproductions. Each of those paintings are in a museum somewhere in the world, and the reproductions there show his productivity and his accomplishment. So if you want to know, for example, the image on the left is Notre Dame painted at Rouen, and we're going to visit Rouen in just a few moments. That particular painting could be in a number of museums, this one in a number of museums throughout the world. But these are all reproductions, but it shows his productivity and his passion. This is his house, and these are part of the gardens. Not only was he a great painter, but he was a perfectionist when it came to horticulture. His grounds are immaculate, and Monet took personal care of his grounds as well as his easel. More images of the grounds. You can see the house, the image on the left, part of the gardens of the house, and then when you walk past the house into the onto the property, you begin to see the waterways and the lilies and the bridge that he painted so many times. Back in Paris, we talked about the Tate being part of a power building. This is the Musée d'Orsay, which is in a train station. It was built in 1900 for Paris Exposition to allow people from around France greater access to Paris. However, train travel declined and the building went into disrepair. In 1977, the French government decided to, decided to take over the building and house a museum. And the Orsay, which is a museum of French letters, which is painting, fashion, architecture, city achievement, dates from the mid-19th century to the present, opened in 1985.
And it does have the largest collection of Impressionist paintings. So I would rather go there than the Louvre.
One of the more noted residents, visit Van Gogh. This is some of his. In our previous RISE presentation, we talked about Van Gogh and his last year in Arles in Provence, and that was probably the most productive period of his life. but some of his paintings are here in the Orsay, and also Monet. The painting on the left is Cathedral Notre Dame in Rouen. We're going to get to Rouen in just a moment. He painted that particular edifice about 30 different times in various parts of the day, showing light and shadow. And we were also at the beach at Etretat on the right, which is, there's a boardwalk there now, and you can stand at the boardwalk and see exactly that painting that he did of the bridge at Etretat, exactly how Monet saw that when he painted that in 1886. It's rather dramatic. This is the Pompidou Museum, Museum of Modern Art in Paris, with the whimsical outdoor sculptures.
And everybody sits on the outskirts there, where that in the middle picture you can see a woman with her dog. It's always crowded. There are people doing sketches, young people just hanging out, and it's just a really big meeting area.
One of our favorite outdoor sculptures in all of our travels is the one on the left, the lips, and then the woman in the middle image with water.
And there are cafes surrounding that, and a lot of people hang out there too.
We had talked about going to Rouen. It's about an hour west of Paris. This is the Notre Dame Cathedral that dates to the 4th century. And Monet had painted this particular part of the building about 30 different times in various parts of the day. And you can see, based on the photography that we took, the image on the right is very close to one of his noted paintings that were there. The one in the middle, and then the interior of the church. It was also in Rouen that Joan of Arc was burned at the stake in 1431. Other images of Notre Dame, and there's Joan in the middle with an important chalice, and these are interior images of the church. Right near this particular church is the Cathedral of St. Joan. This was built in 1979, right near the site where she was burned at the stake in 1431. The stained glass is interesting. The stained glass was saved from World War II. It was collected and stored. It dates to a church from the 16th century that was in storage. And when the Cathedral of St. Joan was built in 1979, the stained glass from the 16th century chapel was installed in the new building. So we leave France and we go on to the Netherlands. This is Amsterdam. This is the iconic mode of travel through Amsterdam. Is usually by bike or by walking.
Or canal.
Or by, it's interesting because when you go to Venice, the vaporatos go through the canals, but there's hardly any public water transportation through the canals in Amsterdam. Either you walk or you take your bike, and bikes are ubiquitous. They're just everywhere. And these are some of the scenes from the canals. Amsterdam is really an enlightening city, and it's one of our favorites. And the Van Gogh Museum, Van Gogh was Dutch, although most of his production was in France. But there is a very ambitious museum that outlines both his life and his work.
So this is Volendam, which reminded us, if anybody's from New Jersey, the New Jersey boardwalks on a Sunday afternoon. I mean, everybody was out with food and snack. The stroopwafel, has anybody ever had, no, you know what the stroopwafel is? They make a very thin, almost like a cookie, and then they put caramel in it, and then they put a top on it, and it's real thin, paper thin. And so there you see a picture of it on that sign. And then they had regular waffles too.
So when you go to Holland, you have to have cheese. So this is the cheese making process, how it starts.
And this is fake, of course. They just have it there to show you the process.
This is from Mark. You can walk out to the lighthouse, which is similar to lighthouses you'll see along the east coast of the U.S., and then walk along the waterway. The image on the left was almost like a Monet painting.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, it's a little blurred. Yeah, it was beautiful.
This is Zaandam. Zaandam dates to the 15th century and had the largest concentration of windmills for industrial purposes and became one of the most important industrial centers of Europe in the late Middle Ages to the 18th century. By the mid-19th century, there were over 10,000 windmills that dotted the Zaandam River, and about 1,000 today are operational. There was a movement in the late 20th century to move many of the windmills into one area for two purposes. Number one, obviously to promote tourism, and also for the restoration of the windmills in one area. You can see where
So all of these were moved there.
all along the Zaandam River that had once been really a giant industrial complex. Primarily, there were a number of sawmills along here that aided shipbuilding in Europe during the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. So we're back at Amsterdam again. This is the way to get around. You can see some of the individual watercrafts on the left, and of course the bikes on the right. One of the most important buildings that we went was the Anne Frank house. And it's ironic because today Anne Frank would have been 90 years old on this date. She was born in 1929. The house, the image on the left is the actual front of the house that lends itself to one of the canals. And the image on the left is the entrance to the museum, which is
Oh, the one on the right is the entrance.
I'm sorry, the one on the right is the entrance. And actually the way the two images are laid out, it's like a 45-degree angle, so you enter on the right and you exit on the left. And her family, she had a sister, and her mom and dad lived in the house with two other families. When the Nazis came and took them away, the Nazi officials took everything out of the building. There was no furniture at all. During the Holocaust, Anne, her mother, and her sister Margot did not survive. Her father did. When he returned to the house, the Dutch government had asked that he turn the house into a museum, and he said, "I will do that on one condition, that we don't put any furniture in, we leave it exactly as we left it." And as you go through the house, there is no furniture in the house based on his instructions. However, things that were on the wall, like Wayne says, things that are on the wall remain. Anne was a vociferous writer. She was a great fan of Hollywood films. There are Hollywood magazine pages that are on the wall. But to me, one of the most striking documents that we traveled through many Holocaust sites last summer, was what I found on the wall in the Anne Frank house. There was a map of Western Europe, and Otto Frank, Anne's dad, followed the invasion of Normandy with a map and little red dots. Keep in mind that Normandy was June the 6th, 1944. Anne and her family were captured in early August. So there was a 2-month window. And the map that he was able to follow the invasion is still there with the red dots. And you can see a number of red dots on the edge of the water at the beaches. And as the Allied forces began to entrench into France, he began to put red dots. And there was a quote there that said, "We will be free very soon." When we took the regional line into Amsterdam, that's the building where the train terminated. And from there, you walk into the main square where you can get the various trams around town. And another street scene, representative of so many of the medieval towns in Europe, how narrow the streets are. Because remember, when the small towns and cities were constructed in the Middle Ages, it was just wide enough for maybe a cart or a horse or a couple of people. And this is our next presentation. We are planning our trip to Israel, Greece, Jordan, and Turkey.
Yeah, Petra.
And we'll present that in the winter.